Hello, everybody. Welcome to another installment of A Rebel Without Applause, coming to you from my little nutshell of infinite space right here in the wood of the holly under the sign. And today I've got another terrific, really interesting guest. He is a diplomat, a novelist, and a professor. He was born in Kuwait to Egyptian parents, educated at Cairo University. After serving in the military, he joined the Egyptian Foreign Service, where he, ironically, of all places, was posted in Tel Aviv. He advised at the highest level of the Egyptian government and later at the UN. And with his PhD in hand, he left the Foreign Service and began a second career as a professor of Middle Eastern studies and as a novelist, where he became one of the leading lights of Arabic literature. I was privileged to read one of his books. It's called The Egyptian Assassin. He has provided also important political advice, was an important advocate during the Tahrir uprising, and he is now professor of political science at Dartmouth College out there in the Big Green in New Hampshire. And he was also named by the Washington Post the Jamal Khashoggi Fellow. And if you don't know who Jamal Khashoggi was, look it up. Welcome to A Rebel Without Applause. Super stoked in LA language to have you here. Ezzedine Fishere, how are you?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Well, you first came to my attention. We'll dive right in with a terrific op-ed you wrote in the Washington Post. I guess it's about a month ago. And the first thing I could think of, it reminded me very clearly of the moment in Lawrence of Arabia with Claude Rains, where he inferred that the diplomats enter the field of play after the politicians and the generals have fucked everything up. And they don't have the privilege of blame or morality. They have the obligation to solve problems. And I felt that was a fresh view and important suggestion to the current moment in the Middle East and perhaps the Ukraine and elsewhere. So I wanted first to give you a chance to kind of expand on what you said, and just from my point of view, to appreciate what you did.
Thank you. I think I agree. This is the job. The job is to try and fix things. You're not going to need a diplomat if there's no crisis. So the role of a diplomat is to find a way out of the crisis to something that is more sustainable. And hopefully, for it to be so sustainable, that means more inclusive of the interests of the parties involved in that crisis. Now, it's important to distinguish this from wishing well to the world or having some utopian vision about what is just and what is not. Because we all have our notions of justice, which, by the way, usually do not coincide with each other. This is why people go to conflict in the first place. Nobody is ever wrong. Nobody ever comes out and say, yes, I was completely wrong in this, and everything I did was wrong, and I'm going to walk back the steps. And if somebody does this, politically, the people who followed them are not going to follow them in kind of mea culpa and undo what they did. So I don't really, as a diplomat, I don't see the point of trying to find out who's right and who's wrong in a given conflict. Once you got to a conflict, people are actually, you need to think about this. People are killing each other. They're murdering each other. And they're doing this usually with the certainty of being right. And you have at least two sides to any conflict. Most of the time you have more.
Mm-hmm.
So if your hope of ending the conflict is that you prevail and convince everybody else that you are the one who is actually right and all those are wrong, then good luck with that. So our job as diplomats is then not to go into debates about who's right and who's wrong, who had the right to be here, who came first, who did what to whom, and the legacy of history and the grievances. These things are important only insofar that they shape the mindset of the players and determine their actions now. So I'm not saying we should not understand where the players are coming from. We absolutely must. But we need to understand this with the goal of getting the parties to move to somewhere else. All right? So this is what it means to be realist. It's not people. Realism has a bad name usually because it's opposed to idealistic goals. And I think of President Obama as a very good example of combining realism and idealism.
Mhm.
Idealism, the ideal is where you want to go, where you want to reach. As Lincoln reportedly said, this is the North Star. But North Star doesn't tell you how to go in the swamps that you have to go through until you get to the point. The diplomat tells you how to go through this. That's the job. And that's what I've been trying to do almost my entire professional and political life. And that's what I was trying to do in this op-ed in the Washington Post you referred to.
Yeah, well, I think we aren't really entitled, if you want to solve problems, to fantasy thinking, specifically with Israel. Both sides, have this idea of river to the sea and who has the right to exist. And guess what? Both people exist. It's like, well, maybe we could give the Northern Europe back to the Neanderthals. They were there first, as far as we know. Um,
And
that's
it's not that you can. I mean, even if you think this is what I need to do, I'm going to give Europe back and North America back and right?
yeah.
How are you going to do that? You cannot undo history. People, sometimes when you say this, they nod, but it doesn't sink in. People need to think very carefully about this. You cannot undo history. You can only move in one direction, and that is forward from the point where you are today.
Right. So that's a luxury that the diplomat and the problem solver is not afforded. Now, in your article, you offered your solution of sort of an Egyptian trusteeship um, for the Gaza territories as a step forward, which actually made terrific sense. In my own conversations with people, I often hear you cannot make peace with the Palestinians. They're animals. They hate Jews. It's anti-Semitism. How do you deal with it? And I always think back, because I'm old enough, as a kid, and I said this just moments before, that Israel fought really, truly existential wars with Egypt in 48, 67, am I missing? Well, 48, 56, 67, 73.
Yes.
And the Egypt at that time was truly an existential threat to the survival of the small Israeli state. And yet they did make peace, and it's still held. And the Palestinians are in no way an existential threat to the Israeli project. So why the fuck can't they do it now?
Look, this idea that you cannot make peace with your enemy is a very old idea. And in every conflict, you had people who said that and said, even if they sign a peace agreement, they're not going to honor it. And even if they do, they're going to break it later. And you should never trust the others and so on. You grew up as a Jewish kid, as you said, so you probably have heard this a lot about the Arabs, right? And then there's no shortage of example. Look what they did in Algeria. Look what they did here. Look what they did there. Well, okay. I grew up in Egypt and I heard exactly the same. I still hear the same about the Jews. You can never trust them. You can never trust Israel. Look what they've done, this and that, and so on. And again, as a diplomat, I'm like, okay, guys, calm down. Let's just I'm not asking you being the Israeli Jew or the Palestinian or the Egyptian, I'm not asking you to trust the other side. All right? I want to know, what would you trust? What kind of security guarantee would make you feel actually safe? What would it take? Tell me about this. That's the question that needs an answer. It's not the hypothetical, theoretical question about whether you trust the Egyptians or the Israelis or not. What is it? What is the reliable, demonstrable, verifiable security measure that will make you feel safe? If we get this conversation going, we move the needle. And this is how Israel and Egypt made peace. It's not the people, again, people think of the flamboyance, right? Sadat going to Jerusalem and then breaking the psychological barrier. All right, that's good, great. That lasts for like 3 weeks, and then we're back to square one. It's only when the two sides found a reliable security arrangement that make both of them feel safe, that they could sign and redeploy their militaries. And since that day, which, by the way, is prior to Sadat's visit, that was Henry Kissinger who negotiated 2 disengagement agreements, and notably the second one in 1974, where they both withdrew their troops in the Sinai and had early warning stations in the middle, by the way, with Americans in them. And they both committed never to use their military against each other again. 1974, that's long time ago. How many decades, right? Again, if you ask the average Israeli, he'll be like, the Egyptians, it's really a cold peace. They don't like us. You have all this rhetoric in the media against Israel, and all of this is true. But we have not gone back to war. We have not been fighting. We have not killed each other. And all that stuff that happened in the region, think of all the conflicts we have seen, including this war that's been going on for almost 3 years now. Egypt and Israel kept their peace. So the short answer to your question is yes, of course you can make peace among enemies, even if they hate each other. It is possible. Once they both realize that they have an interest in making this peace, and once people like, diplomats figure out ways to make this peace hold.
So your suggestion in your op-ed was that Egypt would sort of assume administrative control over the Gaza territories, I guess, as a sort of a temporary step that would ultimately lead to some sort of political, nationhood for Palestine in exchange for security guarantees for Israel. You've had your own beefs and difficulties with the Egyptian government, particularly the president, and what's gone on there, and the assault on civil society and religious minorities. The list is large.
Yes.
Considering your suggestion, is Egypt capable of doing that, or even willing?
Excellent question. You're right. I don't like the Egyptian regime very much, and they don't like me either. But again, as I said, you don't.
I like you.
Thank you.
That's any comfort.
Thank you.
Like
it is.
Ezzedine.
I like people like you liking me more than Egyptian military, but especially if they have, totalitarian aspirations. But again, that's irrelevant whether I like or I don't like the regime. It doesn't matter. I don't like the ruling coalition in Israel, and it doesn't. Who cares, right? Who cares what you like? So the question is, can they do it? Is it a good idea that they do it? That's the first question. Second question is, can they do it? And the third question is, are they willing to do it? And those are 3 separate questions. So if you allow me, I want to just start with the first one. Why this is a good idea?
Go ahead.
Why would this be different? Now, again, this is a complex conflict, but we can simplify things. Go back to basics. Today, Israel's main problem in Gaza is a security threat coming from Hamas. There are some in Israel who would like to move the Palestinians out and take over the territory, but that is, until today, it's still a fraction of the population. So luckily, we don't have to worry about those. If we manage to separate this from those who are worried by the security threat coming from Hamas.
Fraction of the population of Israel that
yes.
belief.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So if we are, and Gaza is destroyed for all practical purposes, as President Trump has said, it is actually destroyed. He's right. So if you want to reconstruct this, the first question is, who's going to be in control of Gaza? If Israel ends military operation and say, I'm willing to withdraw from the Gaza Strip, but who's going to be there to maintain law and order? Who's going to be there to make sure Hamas is no longer a threat? Do you have candidates for this? So the one that actually has control right now in Gaza and has been Hamas. So that's a no. Second option, Palestinian Authority, too weak to do it. Israel doesn't trust it. Again, you can blame Israel why it's weak, but it doesn't matter. Today, Palestinian Authority from Ramallah cannot do this job.
Mm-hmm.
So who can do it? Can Israel do it? For Israel to do this, that means permanent occupation, that means permanent military control, more of the same that you see today. So that takes us to the simple conclusion that we need what we call in our lingo a third party presence. That third party presence is not a bunch of, with all due respect, Canadians and New Zealanders who are like observing what is happening, right? You need a military force that can actually guarantee peace and security in that problematic strip. It's one. Who can do this job? The answer I have is Egypt. Why? Because Egypt has already a functioning security cooperation with Israel. By the way, there was a rebellion, an armed insurgency in Sinai over the last 10 years. And Egyptian-Israeli security control continued, if not intensified, during that period, right? So there is a lot of functioning systems between the two security, Egyptian and Israeli. And Egypt also has a trust, although it's a problematic and difficult relationship with Hamas, right? So Egypt being a third party seems to be the most realistic option. Some would say, why not an international force or an Arab force led by whatever works. But ultimately, you need a robust security presence in Gaza that has an actual mandate, not just a bunch of observers that will rebuild Palestinian security and so on and so forth, right? So for anybody to do this and to get Hamas, to force Hamas or to squeeze Hamas into accepting this and to squeeze Hamas into accepting disarmament, you need an upside for the Palestinians. And that is the promise of self-determination. Remember what we said at the beginning of this podcast is if you want to solve a conflict, you have to satisfy the minimum demands of all parties involved. Israel, minimal demand is security, right?
Right.
Palestinian minimal demand is self-determination. If we get self-determination for these guys, Israel already has a state, so it needs security and recognition, then we can move forward, right? And Egypt can be the temporary kind of custodial power that is in charge of Gaza, that kind of rebuilds it or leads the international effort of rebuilding it and so on and so forth. So is it a good idea? My answer is yes. It's the best available idea. Egypt is not notorious for its efficiency or its state building capabilities, right? It is not. But among the usual suspects that we have in the region, that's our best bet. And it can be supported by international players, by the United States, by the European Union, and so on and so forth.
It also offers an opportunity for the Egyptian leader to sort of rehabilitate himself in the eyes of the West as a bridge builder and a peacemaker.
So he's a lucky guy. He's really a lucky guy. He always ends up, as tragic as it is, this war has saved his skin. He has driven the country to bankruptcy until the Gaza war started, and then everybody came in and bailed him out. So yes, you're right.
So just get real. Trump needs to be flattered. I'm not. So, I don't quite understand, the Egyptian president's needs, but it seems like, there's some Peace Prize envy out there waiting for some of these leaders. And maybe that's a path forward. I throw this out, not because I disagree, but, there's a painful history of trading one colonial power for another, whether it was the Turks to the British in certain people's eyes to the Israelis. Might that also be a danger or a possibility?
It is. It's always a danger because also, Gaza was under Egyptian custodianship between 1948 and 1967. And we didn't exactly see Egypt building a Palestinian state in Gaza during those, right? And that's what they had enough time to do it if they wanted to. Instead, they ran it with a military governor. That was, all of Egypt was run by the military still at the time. which is not different from now. So yes, there is this risk. There is another risk because you're asking, what would take Egyptian president what would kind of make him click. And I think taking seriously the Egyptian security concerns is key because those concerns are real. Egypt is worried that, Gaza is not an easy place to govern. And it's worried that this would throw Hamas and problems of Palestine into Egyptian lap, which is a hot potato, right? Why would you want that?
Right.
So every solution comes with a host of problems. And I think the right attitude is to have conversations about how to enable the parties to deal effectively with those challenges. So that needs a conversation with the Egyptian president is, what can we, Israel, what can we, the United States, what can we, the Arab countries that are like the Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, what can we do to help you do this effectively? And the same thing with the Palestinians is, what can we do, including Egypt, to reassure you that this is not going to be another occupation that is open-ended, right? Now, you can look at these issues as obstacles and then drop the idea. But if you're a good diplomat, you look at these as questions that need answers by the players, and you generate those answers through conversations with them. That's what needs to be done.
One of the things that you clearly went through in your experience with, I guess, the Tahrir uprising is that democratic means don't always yield democratic ends. Sadly, we're experiencing it right here,
Yeah.
And, this infusion of Islamicist radicalism or violence or religious authority, I suspect might be a big fear for the Egyptians.
Yes, it is. And as I said, there was already an Islamist insurgency in Sinai. There was this episode with the Muslim Brotherhood, and it's a challenge. And it's a challenge Egypt has to face anyway. So getting Hamas in might add to this. That's a problem. But it's also an opportunity for Egypt to have this conversation with the other parties, including countries like Qatar, who supports Hamas and other Islamists, and Turkey. And find a way forward because it is not a good idea to keep dragging this. We need to find a way to turn this from a constant source of threat to Egyptian stability and development into something different. And that can be done.
Well, that's a very hopeful and optimistic vision. And I agree because, sending successive generations of Israeli youth into Palestinian villages and Gaza enclaves with machine guns and having people hate you, guess what? That's not freedom either. And it ain't security either. It's just an unending nightmare. And it also threatens for Israel its prosperity in patents, science, technology, tourism. The fact that I might want to go there someday, I can't go. I don't want to go. Screw it. I don't want to support that.
And you know what? It poisons, even if you don't think about the Palestinians at all, just from a Jewish Israeli perspective. Is this the kind of life you want to have? Right. You and your kids? Even if you're not going to get shot at. But is this what you want to do with your life? Carry machine guns and go into villages? Or manning checkpoints and checking IDs and asking people, it's just like, is this the life you want to have? It poisons, it corrodes society, it corrodes our humanity. So it is not something, that's not a permanent state that you want to have. And the same thing for Egyptians and for the Palestinians. This culture of death and violence, it doesn't liberate Palestine. It poisons your life and your society. The same thing for Egyptians. This is why I'm saying we can't just keep dragging those conflicts with us and live with the conflict. That's not a good idea.
In the United States, the greatest hero to me of the 19th century, arguably, is Frederick Douglass. And in his July 4th speech in the 1850s, he, offered the promise of this constitutional preamble. But he also said that it isn't freedom for the slave power to be holding people hostage in servitude indefinitely. That's not freedom for the slave power either. It's
Mhm.
they in their own way are shackled by slavery. And I feel like there's a similar paradigm here, you know, for the Israelis. My own mother was I don't want to say a survivor, but a refugee from Germany, born there and
Mhm.
escaped or was fortunate to get out as a very little girl. And, one of the problems I think for Jewish people is, this perception of victimhood. We celebrate it all the time, even in Egypt. Hey,
Yeah.
we escaped the pharaohs,
Yeah.
and
Well, I escaped the pharaoh too, but
yeah, you did too. Okay, well, we had my family had an architectural firm. We designed the pyramids back in,
uh,
yeah. So I just feel like, this freedom is actually can be liberating on both sides.
yes. And I, I lived in Israel before the Gaza disengagement, right? And when there was a peace camp, 1999, and going into the Camp David and so on, when there was something called the left,
Yes, the
and there
Labor
was,
Party.
yeah, all of that. And I can't tell you how many times I heard it from Israelis, Israeli writers, Israeli citizens, and Israeli neighbors who would like occupation corrupts our life. For our own sake, for our own children, we need to end that occupation because you cannot have a decent occupation. If you're controlling a people against their will, you have to do nasty stuff to keep controlling them. It's inevitable. And so if you don't want to do the nasty stuff, you need to reconsider that idea, right? The
Right.
problem has been that there was always this, well, what can we do? There is no option, there is no alternative, and so on and so forth, right? There is, and there is always a way to resolve a conflict and to find a solution. And if we, even today, when we look at Gaza, we look at all this destruction, all this death, all those accusations, right? The labels, the genocide, all of this, all of this can come to an end and can become a stepping stone for an actual disengagement and peace between Israelis and Palestinians if you find the right safe way of doing it. Which I think is
Past is not always prologue. It's not written. The future can be redesigned. That's a hopeful measure. I don't know if the current configuration of leadership, if how possible that is, but I also go back to Menachem Begin wasn't considered, the most docile or peaceful person. He had a troubled past himself, and yet he was there to sign the peace treaty.
And the same thing with Rabin. Rabin was not exactly a dove in his history or in the history of Israeli politics. So it is. The question is whether you can design and find a way and push the politicians who are reluctant, or just politicians, push them to a place where their best option becomes a peaceful option.
And
That's the challenge.
And the peaceful option is an interesting thing because, I'm curious about some of your thoughts, particularly after having read your fine novel, The Egyptian Assassin.
Which is not an autobiography, I have to.
Yeah, definitely not an autobiography, but it's kind of a heart of darkness journey into
It is.
in an epic adventure as well. But lurking between the lines for me is this question of the efficacy of nonviolence, of the tradition of Gandhi. Your story is about someone who was a lawyer who believed in, I guess, the institutions and the possibilities for progress in Egypt. becomes disillusioned and embarks on a journey that leads him into a dark place. What's your feeling about just that, the Gandhian possibilities, not only in Egypt, but also in America and in Israel?
Well, I'm very glad that you mentioned both the heart of darkness and the violence and nonviolence resistance to injustice, because when I was writing that novel, I was actually thinking of the heart of darkness, the conjured heart of darkness, and um, you know, writers don't like to say, this novel is about this or about that. But one of the questions that I was thinking about while writing this is the question of violence, the utility of violence, of political violence.
Mm-hmm.
And my personal position is, I came to this position over time, but it is very clear to me that violence is not only ineffective and useless, it's counterproductive. I think violence, that's what I was trying to say when I was talking about Israel, violence is corrosive. Violence is the twin, if you want, the evil twin of anger.
Mm-hmm.
And a little bit of anger might be healthy. I don't know. I don't think so, but people say that, and I'm like, okay. But anger, ultimately, every one of us got angry at something. Usually our parents, the usual target, right?
Yes.
And then, I don't know in your case, but at one point when I think I turned 40, I went to see a therapist because I didn't know what to do with the anger I had, mainly because of my father. May God rest his soul. And then I had to, find an answer. I had to answer this question: whether am I going to be fighting the father I had when I was 6 years old for the next 40 years as well, or is 40 years enough of that nonsense?
Yes. In the desert.
Right? So everybody had problems with their parents. What do you do with this? You transcend it. We all have some degree of trauma. Some have mild, some have not so mild, right? If you let the trauma eat you, you are going to be destroyed by it. So the real challenge for us as humans, who's going to win, me or the trauma? I don't want the trauma to win. So if I become violent because my neighbor took my land or whatever, right? Or whatever reason, legitimate as it may be, if that anger defines my life and define my reaction, and I then become a violent person, then guess what? I have become a violent person. That's the only outcome. So that's what I'm saying. So whether you think you are liberating Palestine or you're protecting the Jewish national home and refuge from persecution, those kind of claims that you tell yourself, enjoy the claims if you want, but ultimately, this is the life that you had. This is what you've become. Every day, this is what you do. You go and murder people in the name of this or in the name of that. Now, I am not telling you this to make you feel bad about yourself. I am telling you this to ask you, is this the life you want for yourself? Is this the life you want for your kid? And the answer I expect is nobody wants this kind of life. Very few people kind of pathologically would, but most of us don't. So when we think of nonviolence and we think of violence, we need to take this into account. And for me, that makes nonviolence a better option, whether it leads to liberation or not. Because it's the journey that counts. It is not the outcome. Because remember we talked about Egypt. Remember the Exodus. Fine, we got out of Egypt. God got us out of Egypt, right? And then what happens next? Everything, we lived happily ever after we left Egypt. Didn't we spend 40 years in Sinai? And what's the point of those 40 years? It's for us to understand that the journey, that it's a struggle, it's a life your entire life will be spent without reaching the goal. So how do you want to spend it? That's the question. Violently or non-violently? And I choose non-violence, even if I lose. I'd rather lose and be a non-violent person than win as a violent person.
And as a caveat to that, nonviolence or the discipline of nonviolence doesn't necessarily protect you from violence. It doesn't, but it allows space for something that you've clearly been able to enjoy, and that's your creativity as an artist. It allows for that space. Your own journey from a diplomat. The diplomats clean up the mess, but the novelists and the artists try to make sense of it.
and try to turn the mess into something hopefully beautiful. That's yeah.
Yeah. So, I appreciate that. Now you're out there I just love the journey that you've been on from, the Sudan and Kuwait and the deserts of southern Egypt along the banks of the Nile to Hanover, New Hampshire. With the leaves are turning green, brown, or the colors are coming. I don't know if that's something you find in Egypt or the Middle East.
Look, this is for me. This is unbelievable opportunity. I just love this area where I am. I think I've been extremely lucky. When Dartmouth invited me to come and teach for a year, I have never been here before in this part of the United States. My experience has all been, Washington, D.C. and meetings, this kind of thing, and New York. And coming here, I'm not kidding you. Every single day, every time I look outside, I just like, thank God for this. It is a blessing to be in such a beautiful area, and how decent the people are. And again, not everybody likes you, but why should they? People treat each other with decency, and that's all I'm asking for.
And as I mentioned to you earlier, ironically, today in the Washington Post, there was an op-ed offered by a former Indiana governor about how the Dartmouth president,
Yes.
I have her name written down, I don't know. Yes, has somehow navigated the treacherous waters of Trump's kind of assault on academia and liberal thought, where some of the Ivy League neighbors have been less successful. So she's found some hopeful, I don't know if it's middle ground, because I don't know how you negotiate with the forces that be, but they've managed to escape some of the traps that the other universities in the Ivy League have suffered from, and the one I graduated from, UC Berkeley, and the one near me, UCLA.
Yes, she started her job in 2023, I think 2 months before October 7th. So her term here has been pretty interesting and challenging. But I think the key to her success is, other than being a kind of insightful leader, is which, by the way, insightful leader means you know how to use the assets you have, you know where you are, you know where the strengths are, and you rely on them instead of. But more importantly, I think that was before Donald Trump was elected, is that the vision that we have here, that she shared, that we shared, is that the mission of the College of Universities is to educate, is not to indoctrinate. And this is something we feel strongly about and seriously committed to. So when October 7 happened, our job, as we saw it, was to help students make sense of things and understand why each player is doing what they're doing, rather than mobilize the students behind this or that cause. And that shifts the attention from try to assign blame to try and understand. And that encourages curiosity and asking questions rather than pointing fingers and so on. So all of this helped in creating an atmosphere that mitigates the anger that you have seen on other campuses. We had our share, of course, of that, but much less than other campuses. And I think that helped also when the Trump administration came after universities is that we didn't have any of those issues that they were, complaining about it at other universities. We didn't have, departments were not taking positions and acting as activists in the same way. So all of this helped. In addition to her kind of clarity, I think she's very clear about what the college should be and should not be doing.
Where do you think anti-Semitism ends and legitimate political criticism begins? Those boundaries are not, etched with a big river in between. I'm just curious because I feel like it's perfectly legitimate to criticize governments and not necessarily be accused of being, anti-Semitic.
Yeah, it is. And like everything can be used politically and be weaponized to silence somebody you don't like, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I say the job of the college is to explain, not to indoctrinate, you can use this and go after free speech if you want.
Right.
And the opposite is also possible. So you can use anti-Semitism to silence any criticism of any Israeli government. And that had happened in the past and still happens. But it doesn't, I think the smart thing that every citizen should be aspire to do is to separate, what's the saying, the baby and the bath water or something,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Just you have to keep your eye on the baby and just protect the baby and lose the water. Now, if obviously you can criticize the government of Israel without being anti-Semitic, but it's also possible that you're using your criticism of the government of Israel in order to channel some other, right?
Mm-hmm.
To channel anti-Semitism. So another element is the singling out. If you apply different standards to one state other than and not to everybody else. So you care about human rights, you say, but the only human rights you talk about are the human rights of this particular spot and not everybody else, right? It's like somebody comes and say, "Oh, free the women's rights in Iran, and it's unacceptable what the Iranians are doing." Of course, it's unacceptable. But when women's rights in Saudi Arabia are trampled on, do you speak out, or it's just Iran? Because you're friends with those and you're not friends with the others, or violation of democracy. Look at what countries like in South America with Chavez used to.
Venezuela.
Sorry. Venezuela. Look at Venezuela and, Trump on human rights. Yeah, what about your other allies? So are you singling out Israel or not? If you have an institution that keeps issuing statements, only like 80% of the statements about Israel and like 20% about the rest of the world, and somebody comes and say this is anti-Semitic, well, there is grounds for that. So it's important for scholars and academics and writers and informed citizens to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, to be able to tell what is anti-Semitic from what is a universal position that I'm taking. I don't accept violation of international law. Then that means you don't accept violation of international, or you want international law to be accepted across the board, not in just one case. I don't accept killing or starving civilians. Guess what? What do you feel about Sudan today? Do you know what's happening in Sudan? If you're not at all, and all you care about is one place, then there is a legitimate cause to question whether you're maybe a little bit too focused on this. Maybe you need to think why.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a fair answer. Alternatively, it's hard to embrace all the injustices that are going on all in every corner of the world. I think somehow because Israel and its position on the planet is so fundamental to some of the origin stories of these big religions, that it gets a focus that, is maybe a little harsher than it would be in the Sudan or in Venezuela or in Alligator Alcatraz. What's going on in my own city right now with ICE and the assault on immigrants. So
Yes, I am with you. And also, if you have higher moral claims, if you think of yourself as a light unto the nations, and
Right.
then your behavior is far from it, that draws more attention than if you were Bashar al-Assad of Syria, right?
Right.
You never claimed to be anything other than a brutal dictator.
Right.
But
A light unto the nations and the city on the hill.
yes,
They're like two, it's this exceptionalism that,
yes. So exceptionalism draws exceptionalism, but I think we can make part of what what kind of criticism that's coming from a place of compassion and affinity, and what criticism that is just vicious targeting and singling out of a group of people. It's not that hard actually to distinguish between the two.
yeah, I think it involves a certain kind of discipline of thinking because I want to kind of loop back to this diplomacy thing that we started with in your op-ed is this ability to recognize core grievances
Yes.
in the other party as the fundamental starting point. So, as you said, Israel has a core grievance about recognition and security. I think they're kind of hand in hand. And alternatively, the Palestinians have a core grievance that has not only not been addressed, it's been ignored, is for their own dignity and liberty or
And
equality or
freedom.
citizenship.
Yes, and freedom. I mean,
Freedom. Yeah, that's
it,
freedom, basically. What is freedom? That's another big question.
it's
Um,
for a Palestinian in Ramallah or anywhere in Palestinian territories. If you ask any regular Palestinian, what do you want? And it's like I want to have spend my life without going through an Israeli army checkpoint, without being controlled by some Israeli army something. I want to, go to my work and go and back and visit my family and travel and come back without being controlled by Israeli army. And it's not an unfair expectation or demand. It's a very simple definition of freedom. I want my cycle of life not to go through the Israeli army filter. It's not excessive to ask, right? So we should be able to find a way to achieve this without this becoming a disaster for Israel. It is not impossible.
right. And when it rains on a Palestinian, it also rains on an Israeli. So nobody's going anywhere. So figure it out.
Again, I lived in this place before all this began, before all this fighting. I lived in this place before the wall was constructed. I've seen how Israelis and Palestinians live together, how the symbiosis, how they work together and exchanged and so on. It is not impossible. But at time of polarization, um, there's something called hardening of identities, right? And then the more extreme elements on each side become more vocal and they become like the guardians of this identity. And the polarization continues and continues. And this is how conflicts happen. The job is to create ways to soften those identities and allow for cross border kind of affinities to grow back again.
So I appreciated your idea. Here's mine. Not the big diplomatic one. The next Olympics, that the Israelis and the Palestinians show up as one team for whatever their various events are, that they can actually collaborate. Now, it's an idea. I don't necessarily think it will happen. There's too many practical considerations, but sometimes sports can become a bridge to further understandings.
I completely agree with you. The trouble is, I don't want to be cynical, but when you try to do these things, you run into kind of tragic comedy problems. So you end up with the Palestinian players in the Israeli team not given permit to leave,
Oh yeah, well then all the other issues that would
right?
arise, of course. Yeah.
And these things, they did happen because we had, especially in the 90s, we had all this kind of grassroots movements and meetings and so on. And we always ended up with, Palestinians denied access or denied permit to travel and so on. So that takes us back to the problem is political, the problem is security, and I'm not against any of that stuff happening, but
Great.
I'm just saying we need to solve this political and security problem so that we can enable all these things to happen. And I promise you, these things are going to happen because people just want to live and to have a good life, the great majority of people. But you gotta unlock these political and security fountains of destruction. You gotta find a way to get this under control to allow the other things to grow.
Well, I hope the message that you're sending is finding some receptivity in the capitals that need to hear it, because, I really appreciate your point of view and this conversation, because it's not about who's wrong, who has rights, and who doesn't. It's about how do we get out of this? We're stuck. We got to get out for both sides. So I appreciate you, Ezzedine Fishere, and your work. And as a recommendation to the folks out there for a look into sort of this other world, check out, and it's the one I read, so I know there's a number of novels, The Egyptian Assassin. It is an epic journey that deserves, I think, people's attention, because I enjoyed it and read it. I don't want to say I enjoyed it like I enjoyed a romantic comedy, but I enjoyed it for the insight that it offered, And lastly, what are you working on now, novel-wise?
Well, I was actually working on a novel that was taking place in Jerusalem. It's called 14 Emek Rephaim, which Emek Rephaim is a street in Moshava Germanit in West Jerusalem, but it's also a biblical reference. And it's a novel that involves Palestinians and Israeli Jews and so on. And then October 7 happened and messed up the novel because it's just made the novel cliche at this point. So I shelved it, and now I'm going back to it and try to find a way of writing it without being a cliche.
Well, there's truths in cliches. Sometimes just the act of avoiding cliches can become a cliche. But I wish you the best. I've written a number of screenplays, and I live in the frustration of trying to get them realized. Unlike a book, finish a book. I wrote a book. There it is. It's a book. I write a screenplay. It's a request to be a movie. At once is another level of frustration. We talk about anger and violence. I wrote a script called Satyagraha in America about James Lawson and a handful of young kids that, were really transformed the country and proved that in a country drenched in violence, nonviolence could prevail. And I was so angry about it. My main thought is, whose ass do I have to fucking kick to get a movie made about nonviolence in Hollywood?
Well, try not to kick anybody's ass for the time being.
Yeah, so I appreciate you. Ezzedine, stay with me on the other side of this as I sign off this recording.
Thank you. Thank you for a lovely conversation, and keep up the good work.
Oh, well, thank you. And you too, folks. Please check out The Egyptian Assassin and keep your eyes open at the Washington Post for his opinion offerings. They're worthwhile and meaningful. Till next time, namaste, shalom, and aloha. By that, I mean namashaloha. See ya.